Lord. It has been a long time. To be precise, it has actually been 8 months, almost to the day, since I started this project, which makes it not the longest embroidery project I've ever done. Nope. Technically, the French Dispatch took me 9 months, so I like big projects and I cannot lie. So yes, as the presence of this video implies, I have finished at last the epic, twice as big as the previous one, Beauty and the Beast stained glass embroidery project, which really needs a better and shorter name. But before we get to the final project, which is, yes, right over here, let's rewind a little, or, 7 months, and find out what I recorded during all that time, because I do not remember, so editing this is gonna be a blast. The first bit of color is going on with the rose. I have 4 different colors here. These are all sequins, and then this was the one I liked the best to match it. So 4 different shades of color just go into this rose. I have not removed all of this. I pulled some from the outside, but ultimately, I think if I try to tear off this interfacing, I'm going to tear out a lot of my stitches or just loosen them and make them gapey, and it's gonna look awful. So I have made the decision to leave it here. As I start hitting that area, I'm just gonna find out how annoying it is. I'm ready to get my first colors on here. July, and I could not be bothered to get out a proper microphone, so sorry if the audio is really bad. But we have a rose and the majority of Prince Adam. There is a tiny spider on my embroidery. Go find your own embroidery. Anyway, started with the rose, absolutely loving it. I'm using more colors here than I did before. I think last time I only had 3 colors on the rose, and now I have 4. I wasn't sure at first about this light pink with everything else, but the more I stare at it, the more I'm okay with it. Princey Pooh is what I am currently working on, and then I'm gonna do Belle, and then I'm gonna do the circle behind them. So I'm kind of starting central, and then I'm gonna move out, which is how I expected to do it. My main concern right now is not snagging the threads. That happened a couple times on the smaller piece where I would just catch something on one of the threads and pull it, and it's the most annoying thing because there's almost no way to fix it. I did sew around all of the raw edges. This fabric unravels pretty easily and frays really easily, so probably like halfway into sewing the outline, I had to do this because I was having threads coming off everywhere, and it has worked basically perfectly. If you're ever working on a big piece with extra fabric and raw edges, that's a great way to keep them from fraying and unraveling. I'm actually working on this a lot more frequently than I thought I would. I'm really enjoying just being able to sit down and sew something. I'm actually having to tell myself to stop sewing it sometimes and go do the other things that are on your list to do, because those have actual deadlines. Okay, progress update. Here is where we currently are. I'm glad I did this first. It looks really good. Also love getting all of that yellow out of the way, because last time I did this, I left that towards last. In fact, I think Belle was the last thing I did. And I wasn't over it. I was never over this piece. I really enjoyed sewing it. But I was at that point where it was like, ugh. I didn't want to do that this time. I really wanted to make sure that I had all of my attention and love and dedication going into these, since they are the main focal point, which is why I sewed them first. Someone did ask me the other day, like, how I choose where to start on a big piece like this, or like what colors to do first. I'm not sure that I had a good answer for that. I usually have good answers for anything, but I was like, literally like, I don't know. The first time I did this, I started with the rose because it seemed easiest. This time I started with the rose because it seemed easiest. Last time I left these towards last because they seemed like the hardest thing. This time I did them first because they seemed like the hardest thing. When doing a large piece and trying to figure out where to start, there are no rules. Do whatever the crap you want. I am still sewing through the interfacing on the back. It's still on there. I'm getting used to it. It doesn't bother me as much now. I think maybe the actual stickiness in the back has kind of like melted away, especially since I've hair dried this whole thing. It's still definitely thicker to go through, but it doesn't feel like as sticky to take my needle through it anymore. I'm running into a new issue with it that is really irritating me. I mean, it's a fibrous fabric, so on the edges, it's kind of starting to fray or shred, and when I'm pulling the needle through it, I get like these really fine fibers that end up on the front of my piece, kind of pulling through. So I've already been working on this for 7 weeks, which just goes to show how little concept of time I have. Like, I'm pretty sure that I haven't gotten in my car for about 2 weeks now. That's really sad, kinda. But also, like, when you work from home, where are you gonna go? Hello. There's such a fat little bird sitting on the bench. Hi. I thought I would share a little bit of the process that I do every time I go to a new section on this thing, mainly because there's not that much to share anymore. It's kind of all just the same thing over and over again. But some people have been asking me, like, how do I choose which section to do next? How do I choose the colors? Stuff like that. So I thought I would just kind of go through my process there. So I was able to get the background behind the Prince and Belle finished, and my plan is now to move on to the background behind the rose, which is all of this stained glass stuff here. So I was originally planning to do the same green colors as the actual rose, just leaving out the darkest color. But upon looking at the drawing again, I realized that the background here is actually a lot lighter than the colors of the rose, which I think also will help the rose stand out more. And I went out and bought some more green thread because despite all of the floss that I have, I never seem to have enough colors of green. I don't know why. Green is always a problem. So this is the thread that I have already used, all of the colors of green that were in the rose right here. And those are all the colors that I bought because I wasn't quite sure which was gonna be best, so I just bought a lot. So let's decide which of these to use. I think this right here is the lightest color from the rose, and I think all of that can go away. So we have this, which is 701. Oh, look, I bought more of it. Let's look at the photo. It's kind of all the same color of green in the background. It's just a little darker on the bottom, and then it fades up to a little lighter. So I don't want to go too far off. I think 3 shades is definitely going to be plenty. But I do want some pretty light stuff up here on the top. So I think these 2 colors are perfectly fine to cover about up to here, but then I do want a lighter shade for this stuff at the top. So it's really just about which of these is gonna match that the best. If I wanted to go really light, I would do this one, but I think the transition between that and that might be a little awkward. I think this one looks the most like the color here, but again, it's like an awkward transition. Once again, despite buying all of those colors of green, I don't seem to have enough colors of green. Okay, so I've made my choice, and it is to not fully decide at this time. I think I'll be able to decide better once I see these 2 colors on there, and if I get a little too annoyed with these choices, I might go back to the craft store and try to get a better third option. Now I'm going to mark on here the different colors. So to keep it clear, since this is already 701, this is already 702, that's gonna be 1, 2, and then whatever my third color is will be 3. And I always just kind of start with the obvious ones looking at the photo because color matching is really hard here. There's various colors inside each little section on this thing. Like, that's not one solid color, it's a gradient of color. So I am having to choose, do I want to do it as the darker side of the color or the lighter side of the color? I usually just start out by filling in the ones that are very clearly all dark or all light, and then I kind of choose the in-between colors depending on how I want it to look in the end. Overall, this one is not too difficult though, because most of this top one is 3, most of the middle is 2, actually most of the rest of it is 2, and then 1 is just like a few places here and there where there's more shadows. This section has the fun little bit here. In the photo, you can see right here, this section starts green on top and then fades into blue, and there's no line in the center, it just fades. I might be all fancy and actually add in a line that would make sense with the line up above it. Fascinating information, I know. So the last choice that I need to make is the direction that I'll be sewing each little section. Sewing them all at different directions, especially when you have several sections that are the same color all next to each other, is how you really make each section stand out. Like every section will look different when the light hits it if they're all going in different directions. To do that, I'm just gonna put a line in each section that is the direction that I want those stitches to be, which is nice and confusing when I have a 1 in a section and then I also put a line showing a direction. It's not the best system, but it works. Yeah, and that's basically it. So now I have both a number and a direction line in every single space, and that means that now whenever I want to sew, I can just pick this up quickly and know exactly which color I should be sewing, which direction I should be sewing it, and I don't really have to consult the picture for this next section. See y'all later. Hey there. All right, so here's how stuff went down. I sewed all of the 701, 702, these colors right here that were all nice and lovely and exactly what I wanted to use. And then I made the choice to use one of these colors, now I can't remember which, for the lighter color on top. I sewed probably like 4 sections of it, and then I didn't like it. It was so far off, it did not blend, it just stood out as being so different than the 2 colors below it, so I took it all out. So much commitment. I never rip things out. So after ripping it all out, I then, you know, started to explore what on earth I was gonna do instead. So I pulled out this thing, which is super handy to have if you do a lot of sewing with DMC in different colors. And that's when I realized that I didn't not buy 703 and 704 because they don't exist. I didn't buy them because the store I went to at the time was just out of them. They exist. The 700 sequence, it actually goes from $6.99 all the way up to $7.04. Knowing that the proper color that I actually needed existed and I had just failed to get it, meant that I had to go find it. But what was I lucky enough to find at the very first store I went to? 703. So convenient, so helpful, so ready to be used. All right, and that's it. That's all I had to share. That's about as dramatic as it gets in the life of a fiber artist is, my God, what if I can't find the right color of thread? It's an exciting life, y'all. I might not be back for a few months actually, because I am gonna try to get a lot more sewn on this piece before giving another update. This is the first time in a while I feel like I've kind of hit a milestone in the process, because all of what I would call the background is done. So all that remains is basically details, and I've been enjoying it so much. I haven't gotten to sew as much as I thought I would. Like, I think if I looked at my hours, because I still have been clocking in very consistently, there would be less hours per week, fewer hours per week, grammar, than I expected to be sewing on it, and yet at the same time it kind of feels like I'm finishing the whole thing faster in terms of like months that have gone by. But I think that all might be because my sense of time right now is just like screwed up. I forget what my point was. I have narrowed down the remaining thread to this, which doesn't look like any less than it was before. Basically, my entire, like every surface around was covered in all of the used skeins of floss that I had done. And I finally went through and specifically laid out all of the remaining colors that I'll need, put them together in sections. I would kind of like to have this done by the end of the year. Not for any specific reason, except that I can be a little like picky about things being even. It's just like, that's a nice time to finish it. have it done by the end of the year. You don't want to have it done by like January 17th. That's so random. You want to have it done by January 1st. I'm not going to put that pressure on myself because I don't think it's going to happen. The joy of a big piece like this is the stitching it. It's very like, oh, it's about the journey, not the destination. Stitch that on a pillow. And as usual, I am talking way longer than I intended to for what is supposed to be a quick update. There you go. That's where it is. Moving on. Hello? Well, I was really hoping that maybe by some miracle I would finish this piece by the end of 2021. That is not to be, but I'm quite honestly further along on it than maybe I originally thought. This makes it about 6 months that I've been working on this, which is not at all bad considering like I've had full-time jobs at the same time. I've been working on so many other projects. But here is where we have gotten. Ta-da! So the only thing I have left, as you can see, is the side characters. And depending on how much sewing time I get in the next 2 to 4 weeks, I think I should have it done by the end of January, which is grand because have I mentioned that I'm already really excited to start the next one? Because I'm really excited to start the next one. I'm okay. This last part may take a little bit because it's a bunch of small areas, but honestly, it's not nearly as bad as the last time I did this, and those characters were half this height. That was not an easy one. It's done. Only it's not. Unfortunately, there's still more to do, but isn't it gorgeous? It is definitely a delight to have put in that last stitch of color, but there is more to come. Before it's officially finished, I have to go back and go over all of the black outlines, all of them. It really does make a difference. You can tell up here in the flower, there's some lines that I already went over for some reason. I can't really remember why I did that. You can definitely tell it's so much cleaner. I'm also going to add the black border around the outside of this. Not really a border, I'm just gonna do like 6 strands, probably with a split stitch, so that it has a solid edge to it. If you're making this for yourself, it is definitely worth it to go back and redo the black outlines. Really gives it that stained glass look and covers up any little imperfections. My goal is to get all of the outlines done in the next week, and then I just have to figure out mounting and framing. Let's get to outlining. All right, and we are back to the end. I really managed to like plow ahead and keep my interest in this project all the way up till almost the end, which is rare for me. I tend to lose interest in projects about halfway through. I will usually still make myself finish them, but the second half of them, I'm like, I don't want to be doing this. I was actually still really interested in this all the way up until I got the last bit of color on. And then the final step was going over all of those outlines again. It is so boring. So I was expecting to have this easily done by the end of January, and that clearly wasn't happening. So I set a new goal for myself of February 12th, which is exactly 8 months after the very first time I clocked in, and I managed to reach that goal, yay! After that, really all that remained was taking it out of the embroidery frame, the Q-snap frame that I use. I was considering sending this to a professional framer. I decided against that in the end, honestly, because I was just so afraid that something would happen to it. Like if I ruin something myself, then I'm just like, ugh, should have been more careful. But if someone else were to ruin it, I would just forever blame myself for having let it out of my sight. It was going really great. I was managing to measure everything out and make sure it was perfectly even, and it was all looking really good. And then I realized there were stains on all of the corners. Our skin has oils in it, and when you touch fabric again and again and again, and you don't wash it in between all of those times that you've touched it, some of the oils from your skin go into the fabric, and then as soon as those oils are in the fabric attracts dirt. So you could see little brown stains on all 4 of the corners, which are where I held it all the time. Like, it's where my thumb was sitting. So I did the dreaded thing that I never ever like doing, and I got it wet. I put it in some warm water with a bit of laundry detergent all around the edges and scrubbed them as much as I could. That got a little bit out, but not much. I later came back with some like stain remover, and that got a little bit more out to where it's not super visible anymore. Then I reframed it all up, took my time again, took a little less time than I did the first time. So yeah, there it is. I'm pretty darn pleased with it. It's so colorful, it's so vibrant. I'm glad that I chose a new color palette for this. I will be releasing a brand new color guide that has both the original color and the new color guides in it, in case you'd like to sew this at home. I love that with the satin stitch, because it's done in different angles, even when the color of thread is the same, if you look at this piece from different angles, like how I'm looking at it from the side right now, the light will catch the different angles of satin stitch in different ways, and it just really makes it shine, and it makes it so vibrant and gorgeous. All right, but enough staring at this. There is one last thing to discuss, one last thing that I haven't even looked at yet, and so I can't wait to find out how many hours did I take to sew this. It took 8 months. The first one took me 2.5 months. But how many hours did I spend on each of these? Unfortunately, I will never know on the smaller piece because I did not time myself. I was working on it fairly consistently, almost like full time, I would say, during those 2.5 months. This one, on the other hand, I had entire weeks where I didn't even pick it up. So the months don't really tell you how long it actually took. Instead, this time I got a little clocking in and out app, and I have clocked in and out every single time I stitched on this. I originally thought that that was gonna be really hard to do, and I was gonna forget all the time, and it wasn't gonna be accurate at all, and I'd probably give up like halfway through. Turned out it was only like a minor inconvenience sometimes. So this is actually a really accurate count that I got, and I do think I'm going to continue that habit when I do a big piece like this, probably on the next one. So cue the part of the video where I sit here silently for a while. Just kidding, I'm gonna edit all of that out. So as you can see, if I click on the first one here, the very first time that I clocked in was Saturday, June 12th. It's funny, the number of weeks doesn't look as long as it should be, which granted, there are a few weeks that I think aren't in here. So you can see here that I have entries from 9/5 to 9/11, and then from 9/19 to 9/25, but there's a whole week in between there where I apparently didn't sew at all, which isn't that surprising because look at those tiny little numbers on the 2 weeks surrounding it. So the most I ever sewed in 1 week was 19 hours, and the least I ever sewed in a week was 0 hours. Here we go, gonna write down a bunch of numbers. 538, 236, 331, 1436. And 232. Time for the calculator. 329 hours. 329 hours of stitching. According to my calculations, if I could stitch continuously for, 24 hours a day without any kind of breaks whatsoever, that would be almost 14 days or 2 straight weeks of stitching. And if I had stitching as a regular full-time job, aka 40 hours a week, as is the typical thing in America, that would be 8 weeks and 1 day of work. All that remains is the question, what next? next? Well, I'm happy to say that I've known what was next since the day I started this. I'm doing another one. Not this one. I'm doing another Beauty and the Beast stained glass though. By my early estimations, it should be at least 3 times the size of this one. I am so freaking excited.